They say the love between sisters is unbreakable, a bond forged in shared childhoods and mutual trust. For 35 years, that belief was the foundation of my life, the bedrock upon which I had built my successful, orderly world. I am Sarah Hayes, and I was, until recently, a senior corporate attorney specializing in high-stakes mergers and acquisitions, M&A, at a major, prestigious firm in Seattle. My life was defined by precision, strategy, and relentless professionalism. Every decision was calculated, every move deliberate. My office on the 48th floor was my sanctuary, overlooking the bustling city that represented the success I had earned through sheer force of will. My husband, Mark, 36, was a commercial real estate broker. While successful in his own right, his income was seasonal and highly dependent on my steady, six-figure corporate salary, and more often than not, my ability to front the down payments and bridge loans for our luxury lifestyle. My younger sister, Emily Hayes, 32, was the charming, perpetually struggling creative, a customer relations manager at a local, trendy yoga studio. Emily was the sensitive soul who always needed a safety net, which invariably meant cash from me or emotional validation from our parents. I had often bailed her out of debt, covered her rent during her periods of artistic discovery, and patiently listened to her endless, draining emotional crises. 2 years into my marriage with Mark, our stable, high-stakes existence was violently interrupted. Emily, who had always suffered from mild, undiagnosed health issues she dismissed as stress, was suddenly rushed to the ER. The diagnosis delivered by the somber medical team was devastating. Acute kidney failure, rapid onset, requiring immediate transplantation to save her life. The doctors were grim. Her survival hinged on finding a compatible donor fast. The family rallied immediately, subjecting themselves to a blur of frantic testing. When the results came back, I was the one who was perfect, a 6 out of 6 antigen match. It felt like a divine, irrefutable mandate. I didn't hesitate. Not for a single, selfish moment. My kidney, for her life. The decision bypassed logic and strategy. It was primal, emotional, a desperate confirmation of that unbreakable bond one cherished. I looked at Emily, frail, jaundiced, and terrified in the sterile hospital bed. And I saw the little girl who used to curl up next to me during thunderstorms, the one who relied on my strength. I saw a future where she could live, breathe, and thrive, free from the shadow of death. I knew my highly protective prenuptial agreement with Mark, which secured all my hard-earned assets, meant nothing against this human, familial need. I told the transplant coordinator, without consulting my firm or even fully processing the risk, schedule it. I'm ready. Now. The operation was complex, long, and brutal. For Emily, it was a miracle. She woke up with color already returning to her cheeks, the poison swiftly flushing out of her system. She was instantly better. For me, the donor, it was agonizing, a profound trauma to my body. The recovery was far more painful and debilitating than any brochure had detailed. The initial week was spent in a dark, dizzying fog of powerful opioid pain medication. The long, jagged, angry line of the scar across my side a constant, throbbing, screaming reminder of the price I had paid. My high-powered career, my very identity, was put on indefinite hold. I was confined to the house for a minimum of 3 months, frail, constantly fatigued, constantly dizzy, and severely limited in every movement. I couldn't drive, couldn't lift anything heavier than a mug of tea, and had to rely on Mark to help me simply shower or navigate the stairs of our sprawling Seattle home. I was, for the first time in my adult life, entirely dependent. Mark and Emily stepped in as my primary caregivers. Emily, now radiating renewed health and energy, was initially effusive in her gratitude. She moved into our sun-drenched guest room to be closer to help, constantly declaring, with heavy emotion, "I owe you my life, Sarah. I'm here for you, whatever you need. Forever." Mark, too, was ostensibly devoted, managing my complicated regimen of pain meds, fetching soft foods, and helping me with physical therapy exercises. Their closeness, which deepened as my weakness persisted, became my only comfort. I often saw them in the living room, whispering conspiratorially over movie selections, or sharing long, intimate laughs in the kitchen while preparing my specialized low-sodium broth. I desperately dismissed any faint flicker of unease as post-operative paranoia, a side effect of the pain meds. They were bonding, I convinced myself, over the shared miracle I had provided, a deep, mutual experience of trauma, survival, and overwhelming gratitude. 2 months into my agonizing recovery, the physical pain was still sharp, but the debilitating mental fog of the strongest medications had finally begun to lift. I was slowly starting to regain my mental clarity, the sharp, analytical lawyerly mind beginning to reassert itself over the pain. I noticed small things. Mark was spending less time in my presence, and more time helping Emily with her new diet plans. Emily had started dressing in more flattering, form-fitting clothes, her skin glowing with health. Their whispered conversations would stop abruptly when I entered the room. One overcast Saturday afternoon, while Mark was supposedly at the gym for a late workout and Emily was out running errands for her new art supplies, I forced myself out of bed. My intense prescription pain reliever, which Mark typically managed with military precision, was missing from the cabinet. I remembered seeing Emily toss her gym bag into the laundry room to wash her workout clothes before she left. I shuffled down the stairs, leaning heavily on the railing, the deep sutures of the scar protesting with sharp, white-hot jabs of pain with every step. I rummaged through the small, outer pocket of Emily's bright pink gym bag, searching for the misplaced medication bottle. I didn't find the pills. Instead, tucked deep inside a side pocket, beneath an unused resistance band, I found a small, disposable cardboard box. It was a home pregnancy test box, clearly opened and discarded. I felt a sudden dizzying wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my recovery or the antibiotics. The box was clearly labeled, but the test stick itself was missing. She must have bought it for a friend, a coworker. I frantically rationalized, but the icy fear was already constricting my chest, a cold, hard knot. I moved from the laundry room to the main master bathroom, the one Mark and I used, which Emily also used constantly during her caregiving stay. I lifted the lid of the tall, stainless steel trash can. Tucked beneath layers of discarded tissue, cotton swabs, and an empty toothpaste tube, I saw it. The familiar white plastic stick, and starkly visible in the harsh fluorescent light, 2 bright pink lines. A positive result. Twist 1, the positive test. My breath hitched, a gasping, involuntary sound. The blood drained from my face, making the world swim in nauseous gray. Emily couldn't have been with anyone else. She was constantly here. She was supposedly too fragile, too dependent, too focused on her life-saving recovery. But the timeline was screamingly clear. She was healthy enough for this. I crumpled onto the cold tile floor, clutching my aching side with one hand, the positive test with the other. The woman who now housed my kidney carried a child conceived under my roof, while I was physically broken and vulnerable, paying the price for her life. The ultimate, final confirmation came 3 days later. Mark had been increasingly anxious, tense, and defensive, quick to snap if I asked simple, mundane questions. On Monday evening, he came home late from a client dinner, a lie I instantly recognized. As he hung up the expensive wool coat I had bought him for Christmas, a small, slick piece of thermal paper fluttered from the inner pocket to the dark wooden floor. It was an ultrasound receipt, dated 2 days prior, from a high-end private OB/GYN clinic downtown. A clinic specializing in first trimester privacy. I picked it up, my hands trembling violently. Attached to the receipt with a small paperclip was a tiny, fuzzy ultrasound image, a clear nascent fetus, surrounded by the black void of the womb. The name printed clearly on the receipt was Emily Hayes. I stood there, the image trembling, feeling the agonizing throb of my scar, the literal physical price of my sisterly love, against the horrifying, undeniable reality of their betrayal. The woman I had saved was pregnant with my husband's child, a child conceived during the very period when I was incapacitated by the act of saving her. When Mark finally walked in, finding me in the living room, I was sitting perfectly still on the velvet sofa, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock. The light from the large windows illuminated the tiny ultrasound image and the receipt, placed meticulously on the coffee table. He saw the image, and his face went instantly slack, draining of all color, collapsing like a poorly built house of cards. "Sarah, I was going to tell you." "Don't." I cut him off, my voice dangerously low, stripped of all emotion, resonating with cold, hard fury. Don't insult my intelligence with excuses. You're talking to an M and a lawyer, Mark. I deal in facts, timelines, and contracts. Tell me how long. Tell me when the contract was broken. He collapsed into the chair opposite, his bravado gone. The confession was swift, ugly, and confirmed my darkest, strategic fears. Twist 2, the premeditated betrayal. The affair hadn't started during the recovery. It had been a creeping emotional betrayal that began months before the operation, fueled by their supposed shared excitement and secret connection as the donor and recipient waited for the transplant date. But the pregnancy itself occurred in the last few weeks of my recovery, when I was still too weak to move, too tired to notice their secret, late-night departures to the guest room. The room where my freshly saved sister slept. Emily, bursting with renewed health and a newfound, entitled confidence, walked in on the tail end of his admission, tearful and clinging to Mark's arm, not out of fear, but defiance. It was meant to be, Sarah. It's a miracle. You gave me life, and now Mark and I are creating one. It was fate. A twist of destiny. Emily wailed, leaning her pregnant body on the man I had married. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the effort sending a jolt of controlled, white-hot pain through my side. I looked at the two of them, my healthy sister, pregnant by my now worthless husband, and felt a chilling, absolute clarity. The moment their lives intersected, mine ceased to matter. They had used my act of self-sacrifice as a shield, a cover, and an opportunity. Fate. I repeated, the word a razor blade cutting through the air. No, Emily. This is called fraud and conspiracy to defraud. And Mark, this is a material breach of our agreement. I'm going to use every legal tool I possess, everything I spent 20 years perfecting, to ensure neither of you gets to enjoy this miracle from my vantage point. I didn't waste another hour on emotion. I called my firm's managing partner, a pitiless litigator named David Sterling, at 11 p.m. that night. David, I need full access to the firm's resources. I need to make sure my husband walks away with nothing but the clothes on his back, and my sister pays every cent for the organ I donated, plus punitive damages. Say no more, Sarah. Hostile takeover mode initiated, he said, instantly recognizing the cold, high-stakes, all-or-nothing war in my voice. The next morning, before sunrise, I initiated 3 simultaneous, devastating actions, executed with corporate precision. First, the divorce. Mark was served at his office with papers outlining a no-fault dissolution based on the infidelity clause. I immediately activated the airtight prenuptial agreement I had drafted before the wedding, which stated that in the event of any infidelity proven by a pre-agreed-upon standard, which the ultrasound receipt, the receipt, and their own written admissions easily met, Mark would walk away with only his personal effects, the car he owned before the marriage, and zero access to my assets, savings, or the marital home equity. He was instantly locked out of our joint accounts and our home equity. His financial solvency, largely dependent on my corporate income and stability, vanished overnight. Second, the eviction and restraining order. Mark and Emily were served with immediate restraining orders, preventing them from stepping foot back into my property. Emily's delusional new life with her savior husband was instantly rendered homeless and financially stranded, forcing them into a cheap, hastily rented apartment across town, their miracle quickly turning into a logistical and fiscal nightmare. Third, and most devastatingly, the lawsuit. This was my corporate law masterpiece, a weaponized application of legal ethics and civil statute. I filed a civil suit against Emily Hayes for fraudulent inducement, breach of fiduciary duty, as a sibling, invoking higher standards of trust, and unjust enrichment resulting in physical harm. Twist 3, the legal trap. The core argument, crafted by my team, was revolutionary. Emily induced me, her sister, to undergo a debilitating, life-altering surgery, a $200,000 medical procedure, under the guise of a loving, familial relationship, while simultaneously engaging in a clandestine relationship with my husband. Her acceptance of my organ and her subsequent conduct constituted a fundamental breach of that implicit trust, rendering the donation effectively, fraudulently obtained, in a civil context. The law explicitly forbids selling organs, But it does not forbid suing for compensation for the damages and costs incurred when the act of donation is predicated on fraud. The lawsuit demanded $200,000 in medical costs, $150,000 in compensation for lost wages, career opportunities, and the cost of replacing the specialized in-home care I required, and a staggering $500,000 for extreme emotional distress and punitive damages. The media coverage was immediate, intense, and globally explosive. The headline screamed, "M and a lawyer sues sister over donated kidney after discovering affair and pregnancy." The public shaming was a weapon sharper than any lawsuit. The moral outrage was universal. Emily, who had just started her new, healthy, pregnant life, was immediately targeted. Her yoga studio fired her for the scandal, claiming reputational damage. Mark's real estate firm, reliant on high-end, discreet clients, dropped him due to the negative publicity, leaving him unemployable and panicked. They couldn't afford a public defender, much less a competent lawyer to counter my firm's M&A-level litigation team. Within 3 months, facing financial ruin, mounting legal fees, and the certain loss of the case due to the undeniable evidence of their betrayal, Emily settled. The settlement was brutal and final. She was ordered to repay the entire $200,000 in medical costs in full, plus all my massive legal fees, forcing her into immediate, total bankruptcy. She lost everything she had, and the debt, secured by a long-term payment plan, would haunt her, making her miracle baby a financial liability for decades to come. I stood on the courthouse steps that day, the late afternoon sun warm on my face. I was physically healing, but emotionally hardened into something colder, stronger, and far more discerning. The scar on my side no longer felt like a symbol of foolish sacrifice. It was a badge of honor, a reminder of the price paid for my freedom and my calculated vengeance. I had lost a husband and a sister, but I had regained my life, my dignity, and my financial empire. They thought they could use my generosity and my vulnerability to build their own lives. I showed them that a corporate lawyer, scorned and betrayed, could weaponize compassion and meticulously destroy 2 lives with nothing but a signed document, undeniable evidence, and a perfectly placed civil lawsuit. The kidney saved her life, but my vengeance bankrupted her existence.